Hello and welcome to this special broadcast on WION. My name is Mohammed Saleh, and on the show today we've got a special guest, John Bolton, who's a former National Security Advisor of the United States of America, who's joining us on this broadcast. Mr. Bolton, thank you very much indeed, sir, for joining us here on WION. And let me actually start off with this question that a lot of people have been pondering about. Now, there is going to be a Ukraine peace summit that will be held in Switzerland later this month. But what is interesting is that Russia is not going to be a part of it. But the United States, of course, would be. What sense does it make to take part in a peace summit where one of the actors in this war, the Russians who invaded into Ukraine, are not even taking part?
Well, it doesn't make any sense. And I don't expect any real movement. I don't expect any new proposals. In fact, we saw President Zelensky of Ukraine this past weekend in Singapore claim that China, and I think he's probably right, but claim that China is actively working to make sure that that no progress is made in Lausanne. It doesn't surprise me that China is doing that. I don't know why they think it's worth the effort. It's pretty clear that the differences that remain between Russia and Ukraine are not going to be bridged in this kind of peace conference.
Now, you know, at the start of this conflict, before this conflict started, the Russians and the Chinese, of course, signed a no-limits agreement. And ever since this war broke out, the United States has been trying to impose sanctions on Russia. It's been trying to dissuade China from helping Russia out. Now, the Chinese at least have said that they're not sending any weapons to the Russian side. But the fact is there are components that seem to be manufactured within China that have been found in the Russian weapons. How does the United States look at the role that China has played, perhaps not an active one, but backing the Chinese, you know, letting the Chinese electronics be made available to the Russians? How do the Americans perceive that?
Well, I think the U.S. government is not concerned enough about what's happening because China's support manifests itself in a lot of different ways, including using China's opaque financial system to help launder sanctioned Russian money out into international markets, substantially increasing Chinese purchases of Russian oil and gas, and doing a lot of other things to facilitate the Russian war effort. I think it's part of what has emerged in the past year as a new axis between Beijing and Moscow. It reminds us of the Sino-Soviet alliance during the Cold War, except this time China is very much the dominant partner and Russia's clearly the junior partner. But I think you can see the assistance North Korea has provided Russia, selling artillery and ammunition. North Korea obviously being one of the outriders of this new axis, along with Iran and Syria, Belarus, and other countries. So it's a very disturbing prospect, and really in many respects it's no longer a European war. With Chinese involvement, it has global implications.
And also considering that the Americans are sending weapons to the Ukrainian, $61 billion was the budget that was passed about a month ago. How successful do you think this American funding for the Ukrainian war effort has been in the last 6-8 weeks, ever since that has kicked in?
Well, finally, it's getting to the Ukrainians. I think it's stopped the Russian advances. I think over what's unfortunately now more than 2 years of war since Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine, that the U.S. and NATO did not respond as effectively, as strategically as we might have in terms of the provision of assistance. All NATO members still say that their objective is the restoration of full Ukrainian sovereignty, territorial integrity, but we have not aided Ukraine in an efficient, effective way to allow them to achieve that objective.
You know, this looks like a strategy where the war can continue to go on pretty much for as long as the resources of either side last. This is clearly a war of attrition that is currently being fought. So do the Americans actually have a strategy to help the Ukrainians to push the Russians back? Because at this moment, what the Ukrainians have done is that they've been able to hold off the Russian onslaught for now, but they've not been able to evict the Russians in the territory that's been captured in this war so far.
Right. No, I agree with that. That's why the question of what NATO's objective is so important. And what they've said basically is all Russian troops off Ukrainian soil, a return to what is known as the Belavasia Agreement that resulted in the dissolution of the former Soviet Union, with each republic holding on to the territory along the republic boundary lines internal to the Soviet Union at the time, which includes the Russians getting out of eastern and southern Ukraine and out of the Crimea. But I don't think that's what the Biden administration is trying to do. I think they're trying to prevent Ukraine from losing the war.
Right.
But at least before the election this November, when Biden is in serious trouble, they don't want to take the steps and haven't wanted to take the steps to allow Ukraine to win the war.
All right, interesting. Let's also now talk about the other war that is brewing in West Asia. This is, of course, about what is happening in the Palestinian territory of Gaza. Now, on Monday, the American President, Joe Biden, of course, put forth the proposal of a peace deal that he gave the impression that the Israelis may have put forth this themselves, and he was announcing it. But later on, it was found that the Israelis were not very enthusiastic to stick to a peace deal that was proposed by the American president. What is your reading of Joe Biden putting forth the proposal for a peace deal that has been rebuffed by the Israelis?
Well, it looks at this moment like he's going to be rebuffed by both Hamas and Israel, and it's not clear to me what the administration thought it was doing. I think, as in the case of Ukraine, the Biden administration is driven by a concern of the upcoming election. Their policy has irritated the Muslim American community and the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. It's also irritated pro-Israeli Americans, Jewish community, evangelical Christians, and others. And so Biden is at risk of not satisfying anybody. We'll see in the coming days, but it looks to me like this proposal isn't going to go anywhere.
You know, but the fact is this proposal was put forth, announced by the American president, that was rebuffed by the Israelis. And this shows that the Americans, at least in terms of how they are projecting themselves, are way weaker than what the American position actually is. Because the Israelis are fighting this war with the help of American weapons. They would not be able to fight this war without the American weapons. And if the Israeli leadership is rebuffing the American president on a peace deal such as this, it actually shows Biden in some very poor light.
I agree. Look, this is not, though, I think it's important, not simply a war of Israel against Hamas. This really is an Iranian war against Israel using all of its terrorist surrogates in the region. Hamas beginning the war on October the 7th, but the Houthis in Yemen, armed and equipped by Iran for years now, closing the Suez Canal, Red Sea transit route, a critical route for oil and other commodities from the region, from South Asia and East Asia to Europe. Hezbollah in the north rocketing Israeli territory continuously since October the 7th. Shia militia in Iraq attacking American military and civilian positions. Right. And Iran itself firing drones and rockets at the territory of Israel. So if you don't look at the big picture, which the Biden administration is not doing, you're not going to see a way to bring this to a conclusion.
You know, but the Americans, do they want to bring this to a conclusion? Because Joe Biden said that he sees an invasion of Rafah as a red line. And what we've witnessed in the course of the last 4 weeks is that the Israelis are operating right bang in the middle of Rafah, a place where 1.4 million Palestinians had sought refuge and a few 100,000 remain there. Does America, under Joe Biden, even have a red line for what Israel is doing in the Gaza Strip?
Look, it's not clear Biden has a coherent policy on this conflict at all, not just on Rafah, but on the policy overall. And as I say, I think it's driven in large measure by domestic American political concerns, and it's not achieving its objectives. Look, Israel has declared its national policy is to eliminate Hamas politically and militarily. I think they're justified in doing that. And I think, frankly, the U.S. ought to get out of their way and help them finish the job. And right. Once Hamas is eliminated, then you can talk about what may come next in Gaza.
You know, but the statement that has been put out by Joe Biden, where he's in fact gone on to concede that the reason why Benjamin Netanyahu is continuing with this war at this moment looks more like it is being done for Netanyahu's own political survival. Because the minute Netanyahu agrees to any kind of a peace deal, even to bring back the hostages, his allies, such as Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich, will take back their support, resulting in Netanyahu's government to fall, which would then mean that he would face serious charges of corruption and end up in prison. So this is a war that Netanyahu seems to be prolonging only to keep his political survival intact. Does Biden not see this?
Well, I don't see that. Look, Netanyahu has two major figures in his war cabinet. Benny Gantz, the leader of an opposition party, Noam Gallant, the defense minister of Netanyahu's own political party, both of whom want to be prime minister. And I feel very confident neither one of them are sitting around saying, well, let Bibi do what he wants to do for as long as he wants to do it. It's not in Israel's interest for this struggle against Hamas to continue when Israel has the capacity to eliminate Hamas's remaining military units, and
but you don't
they
think
should
that
do it.
Netanyahu is carrying out this war only to extend his political survival? Joe Biden has said
no, I don't.
many words in one of his interviews.
Yeah, Biden's wrong, as he is on so many things. You know, they have to deal with Hezbollah. They have to deal with the Iranian nuclear threat. And for what it's worth, when people turn to the people of Israel to ask what they think, Netanyahu's popularity has been rising steadily over the past several months.
All right. Now, there are reports that the Houthis reportedly fired a missile which has struck the USS Dwight Eisenhower, which is an American aircraft carrier. The longer this war drags on, the more the American involvement is and the more the risk for American assets in the region. There are not clear enough reports as to how bad the damage to USS Dwight Eisenhower is. But does it not concern you that if these reports are true, that the Houthis have actually now targeted the USS Dwight Eisenhower?
We'll have to see what the reports are. I admit this would be very serious if it happened. Look, months ago, the United States, Britain, the others who are participating in efforts to suppress the Houthi rocket and drone fire should have gone much further. It is a direct challenge, a threat to freedom of the seas worldwide if the Houthis can close off that Suez Canal, Bab el-Mandeb Strait transit route through the Red Sea. It's already hurt Egypt significantly through loss of revenues of Suez Canal traffic. It is utterly unacceptable, and the Houthis wouldn't have the ability to take a rowboat out of the water if it weren't for the aid, the military assistance, the intelligence, financial assistance that Iran has been supplying them for many years. So the source of this problem is Iran, as is the source of the Hamas problem, the Hezbollah problem, the militia problem in Iraq and Syria. I think we ought to end the Houthi military capability, and if need be, if that means strikes on Iranian territory to stop the flow of weapons coming from Iran to the Houthis, we should do it.
Now, just about a fortnight ago, let's now shift our attention to another potential theater of war. A fortnight ago, the Chinese carried out what they described as the punishment military drills with which they again blockaded Taiwan. Now, the American position is that of strategic ambiguity in terms of whether it would involve itself militarily to defend Taiwan in case of a Chinese invasion. But the message that's gone out is pretty clear, that the Chinese look very determined to unify Taiwan with mainland China. And many are saying that at a time when the United States is caught up in the conflict in Ukraine and Gaza, this is where the Chinese are sensing their moment. What is your assessment on that?
Well, I'm very worried that the Chinese think the U.S. has a bandwidth problem with the war in Ukraine, where the Biden administration has performed weakly, with the war in the Middle East, where the Biden administration has performed weakly, and in the Taiwan Strait, where showing adequate deterrence, I think, is being put to a test. I mean, I think these provocations are intended to affect politics in Taiwan and affect politics in the United States. I think the time to end strategic ambiguity came long ago. We ought to be very clear, as sometimes Biden is in his public statements, that we would defend Taiwan if China attacked. It's unacceptable all across the periphery, including, I should think, in India, that unprovoked attacks on independent democratic states by China are unacceptable.
Now, a lot of people are in fact saying that the United States, by backing and sometimes in some cases taking part actively in some of these conflicts, is stretching itself pretty thin. It's stretching its military resources pretty thin, be it in Ukraine, be it in the Gaza Strip, and be it in Taiwan and also in the Philippines, with whom it has come up with this new grouping called the Squad. What is your assessment of this? Is Biden stretching the American military establishment very thin because of the many wars that he seems to be getting into?
No, I mean, Biden's most recent defense budget for the fiscal year beginning October 1 is only a 1% increase in the Department of Defense budget. And at a time when inflation is over 3%, that amounts to a real reduction in defense. Senator Wicker, the ranking Republican on the Senate Armed Services Committee, recently said that he wanted a $55 billion increase in the defense budget. And I think that's exactly the direction we need to be going. We've got the capacity to do this. There's no question about it. There's just a question of spending less money wastefully on domestic programs and doing more and hoping that our friends and allies do more as well on defense so that we're not stretched with conflicts all around the world. We did this before. We can certainly do it again.
All right, well, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. John Bolton, for joining us and getting us that perspective then.
Thank you for having me.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.